Good morning. This is Gretchen Vogel. My website is How Spirit Works. Facebook page Choices Publishing. We're going to be talking this morning about fear. And if you've been following me, you know that I channel from the City of Light, or the Human Species Consciousness Pool, where all of the humans experience, everywhere that humans exist in the universe, is contained. And in meditation, when I go up there, it appears as if I'm going to a theater, amphitheater, and I listen to lectures and speak what I am hearing into a tape recorder. So what I am doing today for you is offering the original meditation as I received it, but I'm listening to it and then re-speaking it to you. So let's get started with fear, which is our topic today, how to deal with fear, both present and unpresent things we're afraid of. All right, let's go. Fear is the unknowing. Fear is ignorance to a great extent. When something is understood about something that you're afraid of, then the fear is diminished. So if we seek out knowledge about what we're afraid of, it can actually desensitize ourselves to a chronic fear. The more involved we get with finding out information, we will become less fearful by finding out information about, through the identification of what we're afraid of. So the first step in overcoming fear is to identify exactly what one is afraid of. And then you can investigate the many aspects of that subject. So for example, if one is afraid of cancer, one might spend some time investigating cancer from the medical angle, from the holistic healing angle, everything that's you can tap on it, whether that information is true or not, or whether that information can be taken for being true or not. Just facing the topic, just investigating the topic, can help to diminish or mitigate the fear of that particular topic. So that does serve, information and knowledge does serve to defeat fear in our lives. Fear becomes a real handicap in life when one cannot pinpoint or identify what one is afraid of. And this is when the free-floating anxiety and the rampant fear that are manifest in phobias and neurological disorders or neuroses, because they cannot be dealt with because the exact source of the fear is not really confronted or identified or understood. And that's where traditional psychoanalysis is helpful, in that it can pinpoint and identify what one is afraid of. It is too broad a generalization to say that all neurosis and all illness is a result of fear, but fear certainly perpetuates or is the feeding mechanism into the continuance of what you might perceive as a negative experience in life. Fear amplifies what we perceive of as negativity in our life. Fear feeds the negative side of experience. Negative in that it is leading away from health, away from knowledge, away from understanding of the ultimate truth of our reality. It leads away from self-realization. It leads away from love, the kindness, the giving that we share with one another. Leads away from the feeling of unity. And fear is what empowers these debilitating processes. Fear is what the debilitating process is. So that once a fear is identified and thoroughly investigated, that disempowers the fear in the object that one is afraid of. And so, for example, if one is afraid of another person, the very best way to disempower that particular fear is to explore that person. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to go up to that person and confront that person. It just means to talk to other people who know that person, and as best one can, just explore the aspects or identify what about that person is causing your fear. Fear is very rampant in our physical bodies. And by rampant, we mean that people experience fear because we're in a physical body. As we know, it is counterproductive to feel fear after we're dead. It is counterproductive even to remember the fear in the body once we're out of body. And in between reincarnation, it's very unproductive to recall the fear that we experience here in physical to oneself. In fact, it's not really possible to feel fear once we're out of the physical body, because the tangible, abiding fear that we experience here is very linked to the physical body. So fear is tied to the physical body. It was originally intended and integrated into the physical body as a function of survival. It is very clear that some negative warning system would be required in a body as fragile and vulnerable as the physical body is. When we enter the rather precise laws of physical manifestation, we must adhere to these laws. For example, we don't walk over a cliff because gravity, even though gravity is entirely impersonal, just as a law, just as a physical law, we die because of gravity. And also the law of fluid. We can't cut open our skin, our capsule, which encapsulates our physical body, without the blood behaving as a fluid and leaving, and therefore we die. So fear was needed to be a part of the physical body in order for survival, to prolong our life long enough so that we could reproduce, so that we could mature, so that we could raise children, fulfill our biological intent simply on a biological level as reproduction, the survival of the species. So fear is very much just a natural function in the physical body. Now, in creatures that are not as mentally operative, fear also exists within their mechanism, of course, but fear is not taken from the physical vehicle or reality into their intellectual or emotional levels unless there are conditions or events that force them into extremely fearful conditions. And I was thinking of, elephants who are trained to carry tourists and photo opportunities for lions and tigers that are drugged beyond belief. I mean, this kind of caging and abusing of animals creates great fear in animals. But if the animal is able to live in the wild in their own environment, then the fear would simply be the physical survival. The fear response would simply be linked to physical survival and not the emotional suffering that we cause by manipulating other species. The fear mechanism in the human body extends to the emotional body and the intellectual body. Now, you may think that fear as an emotion would be generated from the emotional center and then have repercussions on the physical body and subsequently the intellectual body, but it's quite the opposite. Fear is a natural physical phenomena that is a set of chemical exchanges or interactions in our physical body that its origin is in the physical vehicle, and it is then felt by the emotional body and sensed by the intellectual capacity. But fear originates in physical, chemical interactions in our body. In its fear in its naturally occurring form. Fear as it's meant to help us survive. Now, in an extremely mentally oriented species, such as humans, fear tends to become a habit and a remembered reaction. So we're at the point now where we don't even feel the fear generated from our physical vehicle, but certain events, certain sets of circumstances, certain memories will cause a fear reaction in us. Because the intellect is amplifying the fear response so greatly that it is overfelt in our physical vehicle. In other words, more of the chemical reaction is amplified and enhanced in the physical vehicle by the intellectual concepts of fear, the intellectual habits of fear. So that we have put ourselves in position where fear is generated in our reasoning intellect. So this is where fear has to be controlled. This is what we have to understand. And now we know when we're in a situation where we feel threatened. Say we're walking down a crowded street in a city, and we begin to sense danger around us. We'll have physical reactions. The hair on our skin will prickle. Our skin will feel like it's crawling. Our heart rate will accelerate. Our blood vessels will automatically contract. We may perspire on our feet and hands. These are very natural biological fear reactions designed to help us survive as a warning system. And these are very natural. Now that is the valid fear. That is the fear that we should feel comfortable with, that we should appreciate and acknowledge and welcome and embrace, because that is the sign of a healthy, functioning vehicle. And know that its origin is physical and chemical, and know that its purpose is to help us survive. The fear, however, that is not healthy, that is not desirable, is the fear that is brought on by the intellect with the images or imaginings of the mind. This type of fear sets off the exact same physical reactions in all of those physical symptoms, as well as depressing the immune system and what you so popularly call stress in our culture. But this is the mind in its imagining and its workings that is causing these physical reactions that cause so much disease in our bodies. Now, this kind of fear has to be approached and managed and sabotaged on the mental level, because it is completely being generated by the mental level. Now, we had spoken about pinpointing that fear. There are an array within our society of ways of dealing with this imagined fear. One is to block the chemical reaction with other chemicals that are introduced into our body. With people with phobias or extreme anxiety or tranquilizer, which decreases the amount of sensory awareness in the body. And it acts on certain emotional centers in the brain chemically. These types of chemical applications to the body are available for people who do not have the mental control or mental health to control their fears. And they are certainly valid. To keep a person alive over the short term. These are not long-term solutions to habitual fear. Real habitual fear, which is the type that is labeled neurotic or neurosis, which is debilitating in that it saps and drains energy from all the levels of our focus. This must be sought to be healed within us. And healing, more than suppression or overcoming, is the substituting of a state of, is a thought that is healthy. It's a substitution of a healthy thought or an appropriate thought. In other words, you can't suppress fear. You cannot just condense it and compress it until it's a small part of your life, because it is the seed of fear, and it's still within you in a concentrated form. The only way to truly eliminate a specific fear is to substitute and overlay that fear with another thought, a positive reality that will eventually annihilate the fear completely. So the most appropriate way of dealing with fear is to superimpose a completely non-fearful and moreover very positive concept or idea. Of course, this works in terms of visualization also. To superimpose a very positive concept over the fearfulness that's within us. Not the source of fear, not related to the source of fear, the positive visualization. Because we can't control the externals in our life. You can't control the fear within by changing the external situation. You may alleviate the immediacy of the fear, because we are not experiencing it in a sensory way. For example, someone who is afraid of heights, simply by not going to high places does not eradicate the fear within. They may eliminate the sensory experience that causes the fear reaction from the outside, but it's the fear within that is still living within them in a habitual way. And so fear has to be dealt with internally. There's very few things that can be eliminated by external means. And this is where the desensitizing practices is sometimes effective and sometimes ineffective. It really depends on the patient's internal response. And they're talking now about the desensitizing process of overexposure to with people who have phobias. Simply being exposed to tremendous sensory input gradually causes the sensory input to shut down through overstress, through too much sensory input. And this may help to alleviate the symptoms for a short term, but it does not eliminate the habitual core response to a certain set of experiences, which can be imagined, whether they're there or not in the present with you. And so the response, if a person who is, say, afraid of heights, simply imagines himself on a high place, it will set off the same chemical sensory experience that being in a high place would. So to change the external circumstances has no bearing on the internal fear response. And so the internal fear response is what must be worked with. And so to work from an internal base, the only effective way of eliminating a fearful response is to substitute habitually, every time the fear comes up, with a positive visualization or a positive thought. And this thought really should be unrelated to what the fear is. So, for example, say somebody is tremendously afraid of their child becoming injured. Every time one feels that, even on a deep level, this fear coming up, to pull that thought up into consciousness and then superimpose with the thought of a beautiful sunset or sunrise or a running brook or some visualization that is appealing to them, a memory, a beautiful memory of a wonderful time. It can be anything that's appealing, say the idea of a flowering bush or birds or a particular time or experience in their life that was powerful and happy and pleasurable, some positive aspect of life, not related to the situation of the child at all, or the child's own safety, or the child's own happiness, but something within themselves that evokes the feeling of peace and well-being and security. And this has to be endeavored after in a conscious way, this substitution. Every time. Every time that fearful idea comes to fore, either within the body or in the emotional or in the intellect. So, for example, if a fear response is occurring within the physical mechanism from no outside stimulus and therefore has to be from internal stimulus, the idea, even if the fear is not of any particular thing, even if the fear is very amorphous event that's occurring within us, to bring a representation of that fear, even if it cannot be identified, into consciousness. You could imagine a gray mass or a dark mass or just a dark circle or dark shape that would represent that fear, and then superimpose a corresponding shape in luminosity of, say, sparkling light, iridescent light, the way light comes through gemstones. And what this does is changes the chemical composition of the body. Just as the imagining changed the chemical reaction of fear, we can now superimpose a visualization that causes a different set of chemical reactions in our physical body. And if this is done repeatedly and habitually, we can rid ourselves of eventually, if you keep at this, of habitual fear. So if the fear cannot be identified, it still can be healed and worked with. And I think that's a great place to stop this particular one. And we'll start up again.